Okay, we're going to do the third in a four-part series from Robert Whiting's Japan. And this one is centered around 1962, the third week of October, the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's when Robert Whiting, who was born in 1942, turned 20. The title is Monitoring the Cuban Missile Crisis as a U.S. Spook in Tokyo. First published February 6, 2022. Tokyo. By far the most stressful time at Fuchu Air Base's Elint Center was a 2-week period in October 1962 during what became known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. I turned 20 during that time, but along with everyone else in the center, I seriously wondered if I would live to see another birthday. We fully expected a Soviet nuclear warhead to take out our facility. On October 14th of that year, our U-2 spy plane flights over Cuba discovered that the Soviet Union had installed medium-range atomic missiles there, just 90 miles from Florida. The weapons were SS-4s, 22 meters long and carrying megaton warheads. Their presence placed large swaths of the U.S. within range of attack. A missile launched from Cuba could reach the White House in just 15 minutes. On October 19th, the U.S. military was put on high alert in order to be ready to invade Cuba at a moment's notice. At Fuchu, we were all confined to base and placed on 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. We remained on standby during off-duty hours. On October 22nd, U.S. President John F. Kennedy told the nation about the discovery of the missiles. Branding Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev an immoral gangster, he demanded the removal of the missiles and set up a naval blockade around Cuba. He also had his generals draw plans to bomb the Cuban missile sites in case that should prove necessary. In response, Khrushchev wrote a letter to Kennedy in which he called the blockade an act of aggression propelling humankind into the abyss of a world nuclear missile war. An agonizing standoff ensued, the anxiety level moving off the charts as we monitor Russian and Chinese movements, increasingly convinced that some sort of attack was imminent. The crisis dominated the news as people in Japan and America and the rest of the world watched and waited. The people on the base, both American and Japanese, were eerily subdued as they went about their business. Transistor radios, made in Japan, held to their ears to catch the latest news. The television set in the day room alternated between the U.S. military's Far East Network and Japan's state broadcaster NHK, where grim-faced announcers gave round-the-clock updates on the crisis. Demonstrators outside the base waved banners appealing for peace, but everyone seemed much quieter than usual. A number of Soviet ships tried to run the blockade. U.S. Navy ships fired warning shots at them. On October 27th, after a U-2 was shot down by a Soviet missile crew in Cuba, the Pentagon raised the Strategic Air Command's defense condition, DEFCON, to level 2, which was the second to last step to nuclear war. It meant that the armed forces had to be ready to deploy and engage within 6 hours, and that our nuclear-armed B-52 bombers would be on continuous airborne alert around the world. It was the highest confirmed DEFCON level ever in the history of the United States. DEFCON 1 meant that nuclear war was imminent. Historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr. would later call this showdown, quote, the most dangerous moment in human history. At the beginning of the standoff, Elint Center commander, a Navy admiral, had assembled us, and we'd all held our breath while he explained the situation. This is not a drill, he said solemnly. I cannot overstate the danger we're facing. There's a real chance that nuclear war could break out, and we might all be blown to kingdom come. He added, if you have any letters to write, I suggest you write them now. You might not get another chance. What a hell of a way to spend a birthday. What neither the Soviets nor anyone else knew at the time was that the Russians had also installed ballistic missiles of their own, similar to the ones the Russians had delivered to Cuba on Okinawa, just south of Kyushu. There were 8 missiles in all, brought in 6 months earlier and hidden in underground missile sites. Each missile bearing the label TMAHORN, MACE, was 13 meters long and weighed 8 tons. Packed inside, each one was a 1.1 megaton nuclear warhead that had 75 times the ferocity of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. It could obliterate everything within a 5-kilometer radius and create a crater 20 stories deep and irradiate the landscape for decades to come. The range was relatively short, but Vladivostok was within reach, and so was China. Many at the base thought it was likely that the Okinawan mesas might very well have annihilated Shanghai and Beijing, prompting a retaliatory attack on the 900,000 residents of Okinawa, and perhaps the millions more living in Osaka and Tokyo. The Elint Center would, of course, be a priority target. So we wrote letters home, suspending our doubts about Herodotus' encomium to the postal carriers, which did not include nuclear winter, among the snow, sleet, gloom of night, and other atmospheric conditions that left them undeterred. And unable to leave the base, we commiserated with each other at the Airmen's Club, scared out of our wits and got blind drunk each night, trying to deal with the reality of it all. It was in that state, as I turned 20 years old on October 24th, an appropriate way, I thought, to celebrate the fact that under Japanese law, which the U.S. military followed as required by the Status of Forces Agreement, it was now legal for me to get that way. It was hard to find anything else worth celebrating at the time. Whiting, said my friend Douglas Victoria from Iowa. Happy birthday. Let's all hope you make it to age 21. Most of us thought we were too young to die until someone reminded us that the average age of soldier that died in World War II was not that much older. We sat there scared out of our wits, slowly going blotto. And chance would have it, unbeknownst to us, however, secret back-channel negotiations were taking place between Kennedy and Khrushchev. Sanity prevailed. On October 28th, the two leaders reached an agreement on a deal whereby the Soviets would publicly dismantle their Cuban missiles and return them to the Soviet Union, subject to verification by the United Nations, in exchange for a U.S. public declaration and agreement never to invade Cuba and a secret dismantling of all U.S.-built Jupiter IRBMs deployed in Turkey and Italy. An additional outcome of the Kennedy-Khrushchev talks was the creation of a Washington, D.C. Moscow hotline. With the announcement of the deal, we all started breathing again. A couple of men started going to church. And that is the end of part 3.